So welcome back to the Morbid Moonlight 31 Days of Halloween, where every day this month we're going to be taking a look at the films of legendary horror icon Felissa Rose, building up a career overview and giving us all a history of Felissa Rose in 31 horror films. Although now I think of it, maybe slightly more than 31 horror films, because today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different, which is talking about two Felissa Rose films, both from 2015, Within These Walls and No Solicitors. And the reason that I'm mashing these two together like this might seem a little bit counterproductive, but it's because neither film really features much in the way of Felissa Rose, and also because there's not a lot to say about either film because they're both pretty one note. So I was gonna just miss out Within These Walls when I realised that 70 minutes into a 95-minute film, Felissa Rose still hadn't turned up. But I think that it's the kind of film that I should give just a little airspace, although sadly not for the right reasons, and that's basically to say that, at all costs, I would avoid watching this film. Now that might sound mean-spirited to say, but sadly it's the kind of film that's built to make its audience suffer. Really depressing, artsy melodrama about a sexually predatory poltergeist haunting and assaulting a young writer, made in the very cheapest way possible. Now, I've got less problems with the fact that everything is incredibly low budget, verging on the severely amateurish, because I know that a lot of filmmakers work hard to scrape together the funds to make their own little indie passion projects, and I can be forgiving of a lot of things in films. Weirdly though, Within These Walls isn't made by some young up-and-comer just out of film school, but by a guy called James Adam Tucker, who's been acting since the mid-80s and has directed more than 15 films before this one, stretching all the way back to 1990. It's mystifying just how amateurish this all seems, but I can overlook weak acting, ropey sound, and pretty half-assed dialogue, a lot of which feels like it's been written by an extremely self-indulgent art school student. The problem is that it's such an incredibly dark and grim film that all goodwill goes out the window by the time we get to lengthy, graphic scenes of supernatural rape and the resulting misery and trauma. When a film sets out to put in deliberately shocking and exploitative stuff like that, it's impossible to feel any sympathy for their intentions. Now, it might sound redundant to say this, but I really fucking hate rape in films, and I don't think that there's ever really an excuse to make an actor have to portray that sort of thing. I think that you can convey the horrors of the act itself without needing to go into graphic detail, and showing too much ends up leaving you feeling that the filmmakers are just trying to get a cheap reaction out of you, especially in the case of something like Within These Walls, where everything else feels so incredibly amateurish. You realise pretty soon that shocking sexual assaults are the only weapon in this film's arsenal, and the only thing that is really convincing, and I can't help but feel that I just wish that they hadn't bothered, because hanging a cheaply made little film like this on a few scenes of really horribly brutal sexual assault means that the end product ends up feeling like a nasty, mean-spirited exercise in getting a reaction from its audience. I took absolutely no joy whatsoever from this film, and I found it a real chore to sit through, and it's one of the few films that I can honestly say just really should not have been made. As for Felissa Rose, well, she turns up 72 minutes into the film as a psychic expert out to combat the ghost that's plaguing our heroine, and 6 minutes later, she's dead. She gives a good performance, and I was actually hoping that things were suddenly going to improve when she turned up. But having her do a part like this, turn up then die instantly, feels almost like a bit of an insult. Although I would say that her appearance was really the only bright spot in the whole film. A Felissa factor of 2 out of 10 for this one, totally missable in terms of her career for sure. And it should come as no surprise to know that I'm giving the film as a whole a 1.5 out of 10, because it's really just no way to spend your time whatsoever. There's nothing charming or entertaining about it on the level of a low-budget film, and it's way too amateurish and poorly made to work as a deadly serious film about incredibly dark subject matter, and it just ends up feeling trivial and manipulative. And on that note, that brings us on to our second film for today, which is the film No Solicitors, or Death by Solicitation, as its working title was. And I've got the coolest transition point ever. The star of Within These Walls, Kelsey Zukowski, appears exactly 5 minutes into No Solicitors, playing a character called Officer Zukowski. Which just shows you what a small, weird world low-budget horror is, doesn't it? But anyway, No Solicitors is the complete opposite of Within These Walls. That film was darkly serious, shoddily made, whilst No Solicitors is a well-made black comedy about a sitcom-esque family of cannibals who drug and kidnap door-to-door solicitors, then hack them up piece by piece, selling their organs on the black market and eating what's left over. It's written and directed by John Callis. It stars once again the amazing Eric Roberts, who once again gets to indulge his talents for incredibly wry camp characterizations, playing a model father who is also the country's leading brain surgeon. To be honest, there's not too much to say about this one because it's so unbelievably one note and probably would have worked better as a short, because there sure as hell isn't anything much in the way of plot development, just the central idea that this family are all nice and ultra well mannered and happy, but secretly are merrily torturing and cannibalising people in their basement without a second thought whilst smiling and joking about it. That really does about 95% of this film's heavy lifting, that one central joke, mixed with a lot of medical gore, extremely gratuitous nasty torture scenes, and ironic juxtaposition of happy music and people being really cheerful whilst doing hideous things. For a comedy, which it absolutely is, there's a load of stuff in it that's really way too nasty to be that funny, but it also does lean too heavily into extreme caricatures to suggest that whilst the characters on screen are laughing at what they're doing, we shouldn't be. It isn't that totally cynical, yeah this is all shit and we know it, here's some gross out stuff that you get with trauma films, but what it feels more like to me is a Herschel Gordon Lewis film, where there's that mix of kind of crazy comedy and extreme gore that leaves you wondering on what side of the fence you're meant to be sitting. To be honest, I'm not a huge fan of Herschel Gordon Lewis, and I think deeply ironic gore comedies like this that look vaguely like they're trying to say something, but are really just about finding humour in outrageously horrible things, as in, there's a scene with a rapist in the park who gets his cock bitten off and eaten. It is just way too crude and manipulative to ever convince you that as a film, No Solicitors has got anything intelligent to say, and I think that a film like this that strips away all the context of its gore and sadism ends up feeling just leery and nihilistic, neither of which are things that I look for in films. Personally, I really didn't have too good a time with No Solicitors, but it's reasonably well made, and I think that Eric Roberts is a lot of fun. It treads a lot of the same ground as something like maybe Motel Hell, but without the discretion that knows what to show and what not to keep the satire from spilling over into pure exploitation and past the sick bag territory. Although I do respect any film that quotes A Clockwork Orange like this one does.
Oh, okay, well done. Let's get her downstairs.
But once again, Felissa Rose is just given a small part here, although she once again turns up as a producer here, which probably explains why Kelsey Zakowski got that part as a police officer. She's one of several victims missing body parts, confined to the family's basement, another of whom is Felissa Rose's husband, Darren Miller. She gets a decent performance entirely from a horizontal position, although her scenes do seem to take place in a totally different world for the rest of the film. A Felissa factor of, I'd probably say 3 out of 10 for this one, basic small part, but she does get a few scenes peppered throughout the film. Somebody who gets a worse deal, however, another 80s horror star, is Mr. Ken Sagos, who gets about 2 minutes screen time and is awesome as ever. Ken Sagos, of course, for those of you who don't know, played Kincaid in Nightmare on Elm Street's Part 3 and 4, and is always just a treat to see, although he's often the kind of guy who will just do those kind of basic cameo appearances like this one, which is a bit of a shame. I mean, the dude is pure class and I love to see him. But I think that for a horror comedy like this, okay, you need to avoid going too far in either direction. I think that this is a film that simultaneously goes way too far in both directions, although at different times. The comedy is way too full-on, that kind of awful American sitcom style that is kind of pastiching, and the gore is often of the torture porn style that shows every last detail in glorious close-up. And of course, this being a torture porn film, we get to hear the classic line,
"Why are you doing this?"
So for me, all that I really ended up with was a bad taste in my mouth, although I can see that more so than within these walls, this is a film that's more about my own personal preferences, and I've never been that keen on those kind of really black gore comedies of the Herschel Gordon Lewis school, especially ones like this that forego wit and clever satire for severed dicks and roasted fingers. It feels like a film that doesn't really know what it's doing, although I should mention that it does have a soundtrack composed by the amazing John Avarisi once again, which is interesting, and again goes to show you how connected a lot of these films are. That said though, given that quite a lot of the music is meant to be that kind of ironically cheery Americana bullshit, it means that I think that even though John Avarisi is a great composer, I wouldn't be in that much of a hurry to listen to this one, just because ironic soundtracks really aren't that much fun to listen to. But No Solicitors is a film that just kind of flounces along doing its own thing, often without the tact or wit to know when not to show something. And it's that trauma-like flair for getting a cheap gag from the audience that ends up flattening anything that this film actually has got to say for itself. For me, even though it is pretty decently made, the fact that it's so chaotic and deliberately immoral and sensationalistic under the guise of this black comedy thing means that I'm only going to give this one a 3 out of 10. I couldn't ever watch it again. Can't say that I'm particularly that glad that I even saw it once, to be honest. It's a messy, deliberately antagonistic film that more often than not, like within these walls, ends up feeling like all it really wants to do is to get the audience to turn away, or maybe just turn off altogether. I certainly would. But with that said, I think that should wrap things up for day 9 of the 31 Days of Felissa Rose, a nice little 2-film special. Thanks for watching, I hope you've enjoyed it. Please consider subscribing if you have not done so already, that would be a great help. And hopefully I will see you back here tomorrow with day number 10 of the 31 Days of Felissa Rose. And I hope we'll see you there, because it's going to be an interesting one.